She was known as Alina, and she worked long shifts as a nurse in a private care facility that served wealthy families. Her days were filled with quiet service, careful steps, and constant responsibility. She learned to keep her head low and her voice gentle because respect in that place came from obedience, not presence. Alina came from a modest background, and every paycheck mattered. She sent money home, helped her younger brother study, and never complained about the hours. Music had once been her escape. She was younger. She played the piano in her parents' small apartment on a second-hand keyboard with missing buttons. Her mother would sit nearby and listen while Alina played simple melodies that made the room feel warmer. But life had demanded practical choices. Music became a memory stored deep inside her, while nursing became her path. The evening everything changed began like any other. Alina was assigned to assist at a private gathering, hosted by one of the facility's most influential patrons. Well-known millionaire, respected and feared for his sharp words and high expectations. Alina had seen him only from a distance before she knew he liked order and disliked mistakes. The gathering took place in a grand hall filled with polished wood, soft lighting, and expensive art. Guests arrived dressed in fine clothing, speaking in low, confident voices. Alina moved quietly among them, serving drinks and responding to requests. She kept her eyes down and her posture straight. In the center of the room stood a grand piano gleaming under the lights. It looked untouched and perfect, like something meant to be admired rather than used. Alina noticed it and felt a strange tightening in her chest. She looked away quickly, as if the piano might expose a part of her she had hidden for years. As the evening progressed, the millionaire took his seat near the piano. He spoke confidently, and the room listened. At one point, he mentioned music and asked if anyone present could play. A few guests laughed lightly and shook their heads. Someone jokingly suggested that the staff might have hidden talents. The millionaire turned his attention toward Alina. She felt his gaze before she looked up. He asked her name, and she answered softly. Then he asked if she could play the piano. Her heart began to race. She had not played in years. Her hands were used to medical tools, not keys. She hesitated, and the silence grew uncomfortable. Someone in the room chuckled. Another guest smiled as if amused by the idea. Alina felt the weight of their attention, and the fear pressed harder against her chest. The millionaire repeated his request. This time his voice carried authority. He said it would be interesting to see what someone like her could do. The words were not cruel, but they were heavy. Alina wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her to stay where she was, but refusing him felt impossible. She nodded, slowly feeling her legs grow weak. As she walked toward the piano, the room seemed to stretch and close in at the same time. Her shoes sounded louder against the floor. Her hands trembled at her sides. She sat on the bench and placed her fingers above the keys. They felt unfamiliar and cold. Her breathing became shallow. She could feel eyes on her back, waiting, watching, judging. In that moment, fear gripped her heart fully, not just fear of making a mistake, fear of being seen for who she really was, fear of remembering a dream she had buried to survive. She closed her eyes for a brief second. Images of her childhood living room flashed through her mind, her mother smiling, the old keyboard buzzing slightly, the feeling of safety music once gave her. She opened her eyes again. The room was silent. Now the millionaire leaned back, waiting. The guests watched with curiosity. Alina took a slow breath. Her fingers hovered above the keys, still unsure. She did not know yet that this moment would change how she saw herself. She only knew that once she touched the piano, nothing would be the same. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, Alina remained seated at the piano with her back straight and her hands hovering above the keys. The silence in the room felt heavy, and every breath she took seemed louder than it should have been. She could sense the guests waiting, not with patience, but with curiosity, as if this were a small test meant for entertainment. Her fingers trembled, and she pressed them lightly together, trying to steady herself. She had not touched a real piano in years. The memory of practice had faded, and she feared her hands would not remember what her heart still held. The millionaire watched closely. His expression was calm but sharp. He did not rush her. That made the moment feel even more intense. Alina swallowed and placed her fingers gently on the keys. The surface felt smooth and unfamiliar. She tested a single note quietly. The sound echoed softly through the hall and startled her. It was richer and deeper than she expected. A few guests exchanged looks. Someone shifted in their seat. No one laughed yet, but doubt still hung in the air. Alina reminded herself that this was only music. It was performance meant to impress. It was simply sound. She thought again of her mother and the warmth of those early evenings. She allowed herself to remember why she had loved playing in the first place. She began with a simple melody, slow and careful. Each note followed the next without force. Her hands moved cautiously, as if afraid to wake something sleeping. The room began to quiet. Further conversations stopped completely. Even the guests who had seemed amused leaned forward slightly. Alina felt her breathing change steadier. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. The piano no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a voice she had not used in a long time. As she continued, the melody grew more confident, not louder, but clearer. Her fingers remembered patterns she thought were lost. Muscle memory returned, gently guiding her movements. The millionaire shifted in his chair. His eyes stayed on her hands. He did not interrupt. He did not smile. Alina played on. She added a second hand, then a fuller harmony. The sound filled the hall and softened the sharp edges of the room. The expensive furniture and polished walls faded into the background. Some guests felt a quiet surprise settle over them. They had expected hesitation or mistakes. Instead, they heard control and emotion. Alina felt warmth spread through her chest. Fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. The music carried her forward, and she followed it. She did not look up. She did not need to. She played as if she were alone, as if no one was watching. The melody deepened and held a sense of longing. It spoke of years of silence and hidden dreams. A few guests felt an unexpected tightness in their throats. Alina did not know how the room was changing. She only knew that she could breathe again. The piano responded to her touch, And the sound felt honest. When she reached a gentle pause, she lifted her hands slightly. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer tense, it was listening. She lowered her hands again and continued. This was no longer about fear, it was truth. The moment was unfolding, and no one in the room remained untouched by it. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, the music continued. And Alina felt as if time had slowed around her. Each note carried her deeper into a place she had not visited in years. Her hands moved with growing confidence, and the fear that once ruled her thoughts now stood quietly at the edge. The guests sat still. No one whispered, no one smiled in mockery. Their attention was fixed on the woman at the piano, who no longer looked like a servant, but like someone fully present. The melody shifted into something richer. It held sadness, but also strength. It spoke of long nights and unspoken sacrifices. Some listeners felt emotions rise without understanding why. The millionaire leaned forward slightly. His expression changed, though no one could say exactly how. He had expected a short, hesitant attempt. Instead, he was hearing something genuine and deeply human. Alina felt the weight of the room lift from her shoulders. She was no longer playing to survive the moment, she was playing because the music asked her to continue. Her breathing stayed calm, and her posture relaxed. She remembered how she used to practice after school with the windows open. She remembered neighbors passing by and slowing their steps to listen. Those memories flowed into her hands and shaped the sound. A woman seated near the front pressed her lips together. She felt tears forming and quickly wiped her eyes. She had not expected to feel anything at all. The piano filled the hall with warmth. It softened the sharp lines of wealth and power. For a moment, everyone shared the same space without distance. Alina reached a section that once challenged her. Her fingers moved without hesitation. The notes landed exactly where they should. She did not think about technique. She trusted herself. A quiet sense of respect spread through the room. People who had once seen her as background now saw her as presence. They listened not out of curiosity, but out of connection. The millionaire remained silent. His gaze did not leave the piano. Something in the music stirred a memory he had not touched in years. A time before ambition hardened his voice. Alina felt a steady warmth in her chest. She realized that fear had loosened its grip. It was still there, but smaller. The music was larger. She allowed the melody to slow each note. Breath naturally. The hall felt closer and more intimate. No one moved. When she reached the final phrase, her touch grew lighter. She let the sound fade gently. Her hands lifted from the keys and rested in her lap. The silence that followed was deep and full. It was not waiting, it was honoring. Alina kept her eyes down. She did not know what to expect. Her heart beat steadily now, not from fear, but from release. Someone exhaled softly. Another guest shifted slightly. Still no one spoke. Then the millionaire stood. The sound of his chair moving felt loud in the quiet room. All eyes turned toward him. He looked at Alina for a long moment, not as an employer, not as a man of status, but as someone who had just listened. He spoke her name clearly. He said the music was unexpected. He said it was real. His voice held no mockery, only acknowledgement. A few guests began to clap slowly. The applause spread, but remained restrained. It was respectful rather than loud. Alina stood from the bench. Her legs felt steady beneath her. She turned and faced the room. She did not smile widely. She did not bow. She simply stood and accepted the moment. The millionaire nodded once, then sat back down. The room slowly returned to motion. Conversations resumed, but they sounded softer. Something had shifted. Alina stepped away from the piano as she returned to her place. She felt lighter, not because she had impressed anyone, but because she had allowed herself to be seen. She understood that this was not the end of something, it was the beginning. The nurse who had hidden her love for music now carried it openly. The fear that once gripped her heart had loosened, and in its place grew something new, quiet strength. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. After the gathering ended, Alina returned to her duties with a strange calm inside her. The room slowly emptied, and the guests spoke among themselves, but their voices carried a different tone. Some glanced at her with curiosity, others with respect. No one treated her like a moment of amusement anymore. She moved through the hall collecting glasses and arranging chairs. Her hands no longer shook. The fear that had once pressed on her chest felt distant. In its place was a quiet awareness of what she had done. The millionaire remained seated for a while longer. He spoke with a few guests and then called for Alina. Her heart tightened again, but not with the same terror. She approached him carefully and stood with her hands folded. He thanked her for playing. The words were simple but sincere. He said he had not expected that kind of depth. He asked where she had learned. Alina answered honestly. She spoke of her childhood, her mother, the old keyboard, and the years when music slowly disappeared from her life. She did not exaggerate or apologize. She simply told the truth. The millionaire listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded. He said that talent often hides where people least expect it. He said the world loses something when it ignores voices like hers. Those words stayed with Alina long after the conversation ended. She returned home late that night and sat alone in her small room. She replayed the evening in her mind, the piano, the silence, the sound of her own music filling the space. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, not from fear or exhaustion, but from release. The next day at work, things felt different. Colleagues looked at her with new eyes. Some asked about the piano, others simply smiled. Alina felt unsure how to carry this new attention. She worried it might fade or turn into something uncomfortable. But she also felt a quiet confidence growing inside her. Later that week, the administrator of the facility asked to meet with her. Alina feared she had broken some rule. Instead, she was told that the millionaire had spoken highly of her. He had suggested that the facility support her musical ability. The idea felt unreal. Alina listened carefully. As possibilities were mentioned, access to a piano, time to practice, even lessons if she wished. She did not answer right away. She needed time to understand what she wanted. Music had always been something she loved. Quietly now, it was being offered space. That evening, she visited a small community center near her home. They had an old piano in a corner, She asked permission to play and sat down slowly. Her fingers touched the keys, and the sound filled the modest room. It was not grand or polished, but it was real. She played for herself without fear of judgment. As days passed, Alina began to practice again, not with the goal of performance, but with the desire to reconnect. Each session felt like a conversation with her younger self. She noticed changes in how she carried herself. Her posture straightened, her voice grew steadier, she spoke with more clarity. At work, she remained kind and diligent, but she no longer felt invisible. She understood that her worth had never depended on status. One afternoon, she received a message from the millionaire. He invited her to play again at a smaller gathering, this time as a guest, not as staff. The invitation frightened her, but it also stirred excitement. She realized fear no longer meant stop, it meant growth. Alina spent the evening practicing carefully. She chose a piece that reflected her journey, simple, honest, and strong. She slept deeply that night. Her dreams were filled with sound rather than worry. When the day arrived, she dressed modestly and walked into the hall with calm steps. The piano waited for her not as a test, but as an invitation. She sat down and took a breath. This time fear did not grip her heart, it stood beside her quietly. She began to play. The story was moving forward, not as a moment of shock, but as a life-changing awakening. Alina understood now that courage did not mean the absence of fear, it meant choosing to move through it. And music was how she chose to walk that path. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, the second gathering felt different. From the moment Alina entered the hall, she was not wearing a uniform, and she was not standing near the walls. She walked in as herself, carrying both nervousness and quiet resolve. The guests greeted her politely. Some recognized her from the previous evening, others were unaware of her story. She did not feel the weight of judgment this time. She felt choice. The piano stood in the same place, but it no longer felt distant, it felt familiar. Alina sat down when invited and rested her hands on the keys. She took a breath and allowed the room to settle. The millionaire sat among the guests rather than at the center. He did not introduce her with praise, he simply said she would play. That simplicity gave her freedom. Alina began with a piece that carried calm strength. Her touch was confident but gentle. The music moved through the room and wrapped around the listeners. It did not ask for attention, it invited it. People listened differently now. They were not surprised, they were open. Some closed their eyes, others leaned back and let the sound carry them. Alina felt connected rather than exposed. Her fear had transformed into focus. She trusted her hands and her heart. The music flowed without resistance. When she finished, there was applause, not loud, not dramatic, but sincere. She stood the room with a nod. Afterward, several guests approached her. They spoke of how the music made them feel. Some shared memories, others shared gratitude. Alina listened and realized how music created bridges between lives. The millionaire spoke with her privately. He asked about her goals and what she wanted for the future. For the first time, Alina did not rush to answer. She said she wanted balance. She wanted to nurse and play, to serve and create. He respected her answer. He said support did not mean control. He offered resources without pressure. She accepted with gratitude. In the weeks that followed, Alina settled into a new rhythm. She worked her shifts and practiced in the evenings. She took lessons slowly, and with humility she learned without rushing. Music became something she shared rather than hid. She played at small gatherings and community events. She played for people who listened with open hearts. Her confidence grew quietly. She spoke up when needed. She set boundaries. She respected herself at work. She remained compassionate. Patients responded to her calm presence. Colleagues trusted her judgment. She felt whole. One evening after a long shift, she returned home and sat at the piano. She played without thinking about audiences or expectations. She played because it felt true. She realized that fear had once ruled her choices. Now it walked beside her rather than ahead of her. The woman who once trembled at a command now moved with intention. She had learned that dignity did not come from approval, it came from alignment. Alina understood that her life would not suddenly become easy, but it would be honest. The story was no longer about a millionaire or a moment of power. It was about a woman reclaiming her voice. And that voice would continue to grow. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As time moved forward, Alina settled into a life that felt fuller and more balanced than before. Her days were still long and demanding, but they no longer felt empty. She woke early for her nursing shifts and returned home tired yet fulfilled. Music had become a steady presence rather than a distant memory. She practiced regularly, sometimes late at night when the city outside was quiet. Other times she played early in the morning before work. The piano became a place where she could reflect and release emotions she carried from caring for others. It helped her process grief, stress, and compassion without becoming overwhelmed. At work, her supervisors noticed her calm confidence. She handled difficult situations with patience and spoke clearly when needed. Patients felt reassured by her presence. They trusted her not only because of her skills, but because of the empathy she showed. Alina realized that music had sharpened her ability to listen deeply. She began playing softly for patients who struggled with anxiety or loneliness. At first, she did so quietly and without announcement, a few gentle notes in common rooms or private spaces. The response surprised her. People relaxed, some smiled, others simply closed their eyes. Word spread slowly through the facility. Music became part of the healing environment. No one demanded it. It was offered freely. Alina understood now that music was not a performance, it was service outside of work. She continued attending lessons. Her teacher encouraged her to explore her own style rather than imitate others. They focused on expression, control, and emotional honesty. Alina learned that technique mattered, but intention mattered more. There were moments of doubt. Some days she felt exhausted and wondered if she was taking on too much. She worried about disappointing others or losing herself again. When those thoughts came, she returned to simplicity. She played basic melodies and reminded herself why she began. The millionaire remained a distant supporter. He checked in occasionally but did not interfere. He respected her boundaries. That trust helped Alina feel safe in her growth. At a small charity event, she was invited to play alongside other musicians. This time she shared the stage. She listened as much as she played. The experience taught her the value of collaboration and humility. After the event, a young nurse approached her. She said she had always loved to sing, but felt embarrassed. Alina listened and encouraged her gently. She saw herself in that hesitation. She reminded her that fear did not lack of talent, it meant care. Alina realized her journey had become a quiet example, not because of fame, but because of authenticity. At home, she wrote music of her own, short pieces inspired by daily moments. A patient smile, a difficult goodbye, a moment of peace at sunrise. These compositions were simple but deeply personal. Her mother visited one weekend and listened as Alina played. They shared stories and memories. There were tears and laughter. Music became a bridge between past and present. Alina also learned to rest. She took walks, read books, and allowed herself silence without guilt. She understood now that rest was part of strength. Months passed, and her life continued to evolve. There was no single dramatic change, just steady growth. She felt grounded in who she was: a nurse, a musician, a woman who had faced fear and moved forward. The memory of the first night at the piano no longer carried pain. It carried gratitude. It marked the moment she chose honesty over hiding. Alina knew challenges would return. Life always brought new tests, but she trusted herself to face them. She no longer waited for permission to exist fully. She allowed herself space. The story was no longer defined by a command or a moment of power. It was defined by consistency, compassion, and courage. Alina understood that fear might always visit, but it would never again control her path. She continued walking forward, one note, one step, one choice at a time. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As the seasons changed, Alina noticed how deeply her life had shifted from the inside. What once felt fragile now felt rooted. She no longer measured her worth by how quietly she could move through a room. She measured it by how honestly she showed up at the care facility. New nurses arrived, and Alina found herself guiding them. She taught them routines, but also how to remain calm under pressure. She spoke gently and with clarity. Her confidence was steady rather than loud. People listened. Some evenings after shifts, she questioned whether she could keep giving so much. Those moments still came, but instead of retreating, she acknowledged them. She rested when needed and asked for help without shame. Music continued to evolve alongside her. She explored styles she had never tried before. She listened to musicians from different cultures and allowed their sounds to influence her. Her playing became more expressive, less restrained. It reflected not only discipline but life experience. She was invited to play at a small hospital fundraiser. This time she accepted without fear. She prepared thoughtfully and played with presence. The audience responded with warmth and appreciation. Alina felt connected rather than exposed. After the performance, a family approached her. They thanked her and said the music reminded them of hope during a difficult time. That moment stayed with her. It reminded her that music could reach places words could not. At home, Alina reflected often on her journey. She remembered the night when fear had tightened her chest and nearly silenced her. She realized that fear had not disappeared. It had transformed. It had become awareness rather than control. She also noticed changes in how others treated her, not because they knew her story, but because she carried herself differently. She met eyes. She spoke with intention. She set boundaries calmly. The millionaire had faded into the background of her life. His influence remained only as a door that had once opened. Alina understood now that the strength to walk through it had always been hers. She began mentoring a small group of nurses who shared creative interests. They met occasionally after work to talk and share. Some painted, some wrote, some sang. Alina played softly. While they listened, the space felt safe and genuine. One night after such a gathering, Alina sat alone at the piano and paused before playing. She thought about how easily her life could have remained narrow, how fear had once convinced her to stay small. She felt gratitude for the moment she chose courage. Her playing that night was reflective and gentle. It carried both memory and hope. She felt aligned with herself. Alina also began to plan for the future, not with rigid expectations, but with openness. She considered further training in music therapy. The idea felt natural. It combined her compassion and her love for sound. She researched quietly and spoke with professionals. She took her time. She trusted the process. At work, she noticed how music therapy could support healing. She observed patient reactions carefully. She learned through experience. Her curiosity deepened. There were days when exhaustion returned, when self-doubt whispered again. In those moments, Alina returned to simplicity. She reminded herself that growth was not a straight line. She stayed patient with herself, that patience was new. The memory of being ordered to play no longer held power. It had become a turning point rather than a wound. She understood now that moments of pressure could reveal truth. Alina began to speak about her experience when asked, not dramatically, not with bitterness, but with honesty. She focused on what she learned rather than what hurt. People listened. Some related. Others felt encouraged. She realized her story was no longer private. It had become something that could help others feel less alone. As the year drew closer to its end, Alina felt a quiet readiness, not for an ending, but for continuation. She stood firmly in who she was: a caregiver, a creator, a woman who had faced fear and chosen presence. She no longer waited for validation. She trusted her inner alignment. The journey ahead remained uncertain, but uncertainty no longer frightened her. She had learned to listen to herself, to others, to the spaces in between, and that listening had become her greatest strength. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. The final chapter of Alina's journey Arrived without announcement or ceremony, it came quietly through consistency, choice, and reflection. She no longer felt like she was stepping into something new, she felt like she was finally standing where she belonged. Her days continued with nursing shifts that required patience, focus, and compassion. She met pain, uncertainty, and recovery every day instead of carrying those emotions home in silence. She allowed music to hold them. The piano became a place of integration rather than escape. Alina enrolled in a formal program to study music therapy. The decision felt aligned rather than ambitious. She studied in the evenings and practiced on weekends. The learning challenged her but did not overwhelm her. She felt energized by the connection between sound and healing at the facility. She began assisting licensed therapists. She observed how rhythm could calm anxiety, how melody could unlock memory, how silence between notes could offer comfort. She saw patients respond in ways medicine alone could not always reach. Colleagues noticed the change not because she announced it, but because her presence carried clarity and confidence. She spoke when needed. She listened deeply. She moved with intention. The young nurse she once encouraged began singing softly during breaks. Others joined in. A small culture of creativity formed quietly. No one forced it. It grew naturally. Alina understood now that leadership did not require authority. It required authenticity. People responded to what felt real at home. She continued composing short pieces. She no longer judged them. She allowed them to exist as expressions of moments. Some were joyful, some carried weight. All were honest. Her mother attended one of her small community sessions. She sat in the back and listened with tears in her eyes. Afterward, she held Alina's hands and said she could hear the woman she had always known. That moment grounded Alina deeply. The memory of the night she was ordered to play remained present, but it no longer defined her identity. It marked a threshold, a crossing from fear into awareness. She reflected on how power could expose or empower depending on choice. She had chosen to respond rather than retreat. That choice had shaped everything that followed. Alina also learned to forgive, not because anyone asked, but because she no longer needed to carry resentment. She understood that ignorance often hides behind authority, that fear often disguises itself as control. The millionaire never re-entered her story directly. She felt no need for closure. Her growth had surpassed the need for acknowledgement. As time passed, Alina became a certified music therapist. She integrated her work into patient care with care and respect. She documented outcomes. She collaborated with medical teams. She advocated for holistic healing. Her life did not become perfect. There were difficult cases, there were losses, there were nights when exhaustion returned. But she faced them with tools she had earned. She no longer questioned whether she belonged. She belonged because she showed up fully. One evening after a long week, she returned to the community center, where she had first practiced. Again, the piano was still there, worn, but faithful. She sat down and played softly. People wandered in and listened. No one clapped, no one spoke. They simply shared the space. Alina smiled quietly. This was what she had always wanted: connection without pressure, expression without fear. She finished playing and remained seated for a moment, not waiting, just present. She understood now that terror had once gripped her heart because she had been asked to perform without consent. Now she chose when and how to share. That choice changed everything. Alina stood up, turned off the lights, and stepped outside. The night air felt calm. She walked home knowing her life was not defined by wealth, command, or status. It was defined by courage, consistency, and care. Her story did not end. It continued forward, carried by sound, service, and self-trust. And she walked into that future with steady steps, listening, creating, living. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them.